I came across a fascinating paper that was published in the Journal of Physics on the subject of extraterrestrials, living plasma, and UFO phenomena. These plasmas have been filmed accelerating, slowing down, stopping, congregating, and even engaging in what they believe to be hunter or predatory-like behavior. Plasmas up to a kilometer in size, behaving similarly to multicellular organisms. I haven't seen anyone discussing this multinational, multi-institute, multi-scientist, peer-reviewed, and prestigiously published research paper into something so exotic and, quite frankly, paranormal as this. Now, the paper in question was published in the Journal of Modern Physics, Volume 15, in February 2024. It was authored by 11 different scientists representing 11 separate scientific institutions, and it's titled Extraterrestrial Life in the Thermosphere, Plasmas, UAP, Pre-Life, and the Fourth State of Matter. This highly unconventional study into the exotic properties of plasma phenomenon was a serious multinational scientific endeavor that involved the Astrobiology Research Center in California, the Department of Astronomy in Arizona, the Biogeosciences Laboratory at the University of Burgundy in France, the Department of Biology at Naples University in Italy, the Department of Applied Physics in Palestine's Polytechnic University, Department of Research and Innovation at the Eco-Astronomy International Research Center in Morocco, Space Explorational Limited in Ireland, Department of Zoology at Oklahoma State University, Department of Science and Medicine at Tuscany University in Italy, Center for Astrophysics and Space Sciences at University of California, and the Center for Astrophysics for Harvard-Smithsonian. Now that's a pretty serious multi-institute, multi-discipline scientific investigation into intelligent plasma phenomenon. This fascinating paper started to get me thinking about my own experiences with so-called UFO phenomena. For many of my newer subscribers, this might be news to you, but for those of you who've been around for a few years, you'll know that I'm an experiencer of UFO phenomena, specifically orbs of light. And my own experiences were in fact intentional. I wasn't expecting to see orbs. I don't know what I was expecting to see, but I was outside in my own back garden at nighttime with the intention in my mind of having an experience, and I did. And we'll talk more about these experiences later. For now, I want to discuss this study into plasma phenomena, and we will see how it begins to correlate with not only the UFO phenomenon and my own experiences, but can also provide some form of explanatory framework for understanding the consciousness connection between UFO events and human observers. This is pretty mind-blowing. The study describes plasmas up to a kilometer in size, behaving similarly to multicellular organisms, and saying that these have been filmed on 10 separate NASA space shuttle missions, over 200 miles above Earth within the thermosphere. Now, this in of itself is fascinating and not without merit. There are some publicly available documented incidents of very strange light phenomena that appear almost organic and multicellular in their behaviors and appearance that have been captured through official onboard cameras during NASA missions, one of the most famous being the STS-75 mission and the UFO activity that came with it, which we will discuss during this video, because these STS missions and the subsequent anomalous phenomena that came with these particular missions is something that's referenced by the scientists in this very interesting study on plasma phenomena. The paper goes on to describe how these self-illuminated plasmas are attracted to and may feed on electromagnetic radiation. Now, this is particularly fascinating because it's something that's highlighted in the paper's abstract, but also ties directly into what I believe to be, quite frankly, an integral mechanism biophysically, bioenergetically within ourselves that allowed me to have the experiences I did with these light orbs or plasma phenomena. Although I'm not certain that the phenomena being studied in this research paper is the same phenomena that I myself experienced, I think that what we have here is a provocative explanation at the very least, a means of establishing some form of baseline for trying to understand what we could be dealing with here before scaling up towards more ethereal and esoteric explanations. What we have here is a scientific study into the observations of novel behaviors attributed to what is called self-organizing plasma. Now, I've interviewed and spoken with a number of individuals, some of which are extremely high-level TS/SCI security clearance holding aerospace engineers and physicists for the US government, who will tell you just how important it is for us to understand plasma at a deeper level. One of those individuals being the US Space Force physicist, my friend Dr. Salvatore Pais, who has highlighted several times in our various conversations the importance of understanding the role of plasma in reality, and also as it applies to the development of next generation technologies, as described in Dr. Pais's various exotic energy system patents on behalf of the US Navy.
Control motion of electrically charged matter, usually from solid, of course, to plasma being the so-called fourth state of matter. Under conditions of accelerated spin and or accelerated vibration, extremely high energy densities and hence electromagnetic energy fluxes can be generated. We would need something else than, than charged solids, because the capacitance of charged solids is electrically charged solids is usually pretty low. So if you think of charge as capacitance times voltage, you must have extremely high voltages. Maybe the way to reach the Schwinger limit is not by the use of charged solids, but by the use of plasmas. So that would be the resurgence of the Pais effect, the idea that if you push a cold plasma, which is really, when you think of plasma, you really think of extremely high heated gases to the point that the electrons disassociate from the nucleus. They actually liberate themselves from the nucleus because of the extremely high temperature, high energies involved. But in this case, a quote-unquote cold plasma has to do with a non-Gaussian, actually non-Maxwellian distribution of the electrons within the plasma. There are ways to get cold plasmas. Yeah, they actually exist, and you can Google them and see exactly how that can be done. But it has to be done. It has to be oscillated at certain frequencies. It's not easy to obtain. But in my opinion, it's much better to do so with plasmas than with charged solids. So I'll just leave it at that. Saying anything further would be like an E-cube thing, and not a good idea.
I'd love for you to give your thoughts on plasma in general and the possibility of self-organizing plasmic intelligences. How can plasma be learned technologically? Are there bridges between mystical insights and frontier physics when it comes to studying something like plasma phenomena? How important is it?
Hans Alfvén, as a matter of fact, believe very much that the plasma under certain conditions, especially when driven far from equilibrium, can gain attributes, characteristics that could be interpreted as consciousness. So, under certain conditions, plasma could actually be regarded as a living entity. Now, exactly how that could be achieved, I have no knowledge of. However, look into a book written rather recently by Dr. Joseph P. Farrell. Farrell, is it?
Yeah, Joseph P. Farrell. I'm pretty sure you're going to talk about the demon in the Ichor.
The demon in the Ichor. He has some fascinating research that he's done there. You have to refer to his earlier books on the cosmic war and so forth. The whole idea of the Anunnaki, the children of heaven and earth, supposedly the god Enki, that was the creator of mankind, him, and I believe the goddess' name was Ninursag. They were the geneticists of the bunch. There were 7 of them, 7 Anunnaki gods. Very interesting. The Enuma Elish, the book or the Sumerian book of creation is something that should be looked at very carefully. It might give you an idea of the origins, the true origins of mankind. But anyway, I'm diverging on many a topic. I recommend this book greatly. He speaks of Hans Alvain's interests in understanding how plasma could become a life form. I am not sure plasma is a life form by itself. So in other words, it's under certain conditions that the property of consciousness of plasma comes into being.
Plasma applications are certainly a key focus in the classified world of black projects and special access programs, and this has likely been the case for a very long time. Now, the paper continues on in its abstract describing the various observed morphologies of these plasmas, which included 4 primary observed shapes. The first observed shape was a cone, the second a cloud, the third a donut, and the fourth a spherical or cylindrical object. Now, again, I find this extremely interesting from a personal perspective because my own experiences did involve a cloud that turned out to not actually be a cloud, and we'll talk more on that later. Just the abstract alone in this paper is fascinating and seems to have been almost completely ignored by researchers with podcasts on these subjects. I mean, I haven't seen anyone discussing this multinational, multi-institute, multi-scientist, peer-reviewed, and prestigiously published research paper into something so exotic and, quite frankly, paranormal as this. Because what they're observing and studying in this paper absolutely shares direct correlations with observed patterns in UFO events. Kind of crazy that no one's talking about this, to be honest. So the paper continues on to say that these plasma forms have been observed and recorded flying towards and descending from the thermosphere into thunderstorms, congregating by the hundreds and interacting with satellite-generating electromagnetic activity, approaching space shuttles. Now, that's a fascinating claim, and honestly, as a UFO researcher, what I find even more interesting here is the lack of the usual suspects that at this point raise my red flags. I'm sorry if that upsets some of you. I'm sorry if this upsets a few people, but I'm not seeing the names of people in the DoD or CIA affiliated arenas like Puthoff or Davis or Nolan or Loeb. And they're not referencing insider sources like Elizondo or Semivan. And from what I can see, these scientists are not trying to sell books on UFOs or going to the conference circuit or making big documentaries. So to me, this is actually a good sign at this stage in the game. I hate to say it, but it is a good sign. Now, their observations of swarming behavior appears to be primarily based upon the characteristics of light-based anomalies on the various STS missions conducted by NASA, specifically STS-75, 80, and 119. So STS stood for Space Transportation System, more commonly known as the Space Shuttle Program, and it operated from 1981 to 2011 as the backbone of American human spaceflight. Across 135 missions, the reusable orbiters Columbia, Challenger, Discovery, Atlantis, and Endeavour carried astronauts into low Earth orbit to deploy satellites, service the Hubble Space Telescope, construct the International Space Station, and conduct experiments in microgravity, material science, and atmospheric physics. Among these missions, STS-75, 80, and 119 stand out for distinct reasons. Launched in February 96, STS-75, Columbia, was the second flight of the tethered satellite system. Now, this was a joint NASA-Italian Space Agency experiment designed to study how a conducting tether could generate electricity as it moved through Earth's magnetic field. The mission achieved nearly full deployment of a 20-kilometer-long tether before electrical arcing caused it to snap. The free-floating satellite and tether produced striking footage showing hundreds of luminous disc-like objects drifting through the frame. Many of them seem to be showing controlled stopping, reversal, and other directional changes, suggesting intelligent control. Although officially these were identified as illuminated ice particles, many have pointed out the discrepancies between the behavior of such particles and the observed behaviors of the phenomena present in the STS-75 footage. Later that same year, STS-80, Columbia, launched in November 1996 and became the longest shuttle mission to date. Lasting 17 days, it deployed and retrieved 2 free-flying science platforms, Orpheus SPAS-2 for ultraviolet astronomy and the Wake Shield Facility 3, which tested ultra-pure semiconductor film production in the vacuum of orbit. During the mission, external cameras again recorded circular luminous objects moving through space, similar to those seen on STS-75. These events form part of the basis for studying in this research paper, which then goes on to say that computerized analysis of flight path trajectories documents these plasmas travel at different velocities from different directions and change their angle of trajectory, making 45, 90, and 180 degree shifts and follow each other. This is likely in direct reference to the STS-75 tether incident, because someone online, I have no idea who, had the brilliant idea of motion tracking the flight path of each individual object in the STS-75 tether footage, because there are so many of these orbs or disks that it can be really difficult to follow the direction of a single one. This video highlights each object's flight path and makes it far easier to see individual directional changes that clearly demonstrate that these objects are not free-floating debris in space, but are in some way under a form of intelligent control. The paper goes on to say that these plasmas have been filmed accelerating, slowing down, stopping, congregating, and even engaging in what they believe to be hunter or predatory-like behavior, as well as producing a plasma dust trail in their wake when intersecting with one another. The paper mentions that similar lifelike behaviors have been demonstrated by plasmas created experimentally, which is absolutely true. In fact, some of the most fascinating conversations I had years ago were with an individual who wishes to remain anonymous. We titled him Mr. X. And our conversations were a fascinating deep dive into the exotic research frontiers of high-energy plasma physics and phenomena called exotic vacuum objects, or EVOs, and self-organizing plasma.
There have been exotic energy technologies that have been developed and either abandoned, forgotten, or in many cases suppressed over the last 100 years or more, going all the way back to Nikola Tesla. Now we have companies like the Sapphire Project, and even though they do not claim that they are utilizing EVOs with their technology, the Sapphire Project are utilizing self-organizing plasmas in their reactor to produce transmutation of elements and massive excess heat. And so we're moving in a positive direction. You know, what's really interesting is with these self-organizing plasmas, which I hope we'll get into a little bit more in the conversation, they may have superconducting properties because, for example, an EVO is just a self-organizing construct of electrons and positive ions, and they self-organize out of chaos. They are working against entropy to self-organize, and they can develop a very narrow membrane of electrons, but they're not really individual electrons anymore. Around the exterior, they have lost their individual identity. They have become more like a Bose-Einstein condensate, and they may have superconducting properties, and that may be one of the reasons why EVOs, exotic vacuum objects, and there's other names for EVOs. You can call them plasmoids, you can call them erzions, you can call them by a bunch of different names. But these EVOs produce a wide variety of anomalies that have been detected over and over again. And I think it's part of that superconductive nature of the exterior membrane that gives them some of those abilities.
I'll put a link to our various talks on these subjects in the description box below. Definitely worth checking out if you want to learn more about these exotic forms of plasma and how they've been observed in lab environments to behave in ways that would indicate the presence of some form of intelligence, coherence. Definitely check those out after listening to this video. The paper also references the historical testimonies during World War II that came from both Allied and Axis fighters. These were especially prevalent with pilots in aerial combat theater who observed balls of light outside their aircraft. So common, in fact, was this phenomenon that the American pilots dubbed them as Foo Fighters, and there was some speculation amongst the Allied force leadership that these could be some form of Axis Wunderwaffe, a German superweapon of some kind. That was until intelligence reports came back detailing how German pilots were giving similar testimonies with the same level of confusion as to the origin of these mysterious orbs. It was therefore concluded that neither the Allied nor Axis forces were responsible, and the Foo Fighters remained an unexplained mystery. The paper mentions that these phenomena have been observed and filmed by astronauts and military pilots, and subsequently classified as a form of unidentified aerial or anomalous phenomena, UAP, previously known as UFO. The abstract of the paper concludes that plasmas are not biological, but may represent a form of pre-life, that via the incorporation of elements common in space could result in the synthesis of RNA. RNA in the human body catalyzes chemical reactions, it stores and transmits genetic information like DNA. So this duality makes RNA the leading candidate in what we call the RNA world hypothesis, the idea that early life on Earth began with self-replicating RNA molecules that both stored information and then catalyzed their own replication, eventually giving rise to DNA and proteins. So these researchers are proposing that the same kind of process might occur in the vacuum of space in order to form these self-organized plasmic life forms, which is just fascinating as a possibility. And again, it ties into ideas I have surrounding my own experiences with orbs of light. The paper's abstract ends by saying that plasma constitutes a fourth state of matter. This again is something that Salvatore Pais has said to me many, many times, and how important it is for us to recognize this, and that these plasmas are attracted to electromagnetic energy, which again is key for my ideas around my own contact experiences. And the paper says that when they're observed in the lower atmosphere, they likely do account for many of the UFO, UAP sightings over the centuries, which frankly I would agree with. I think this is very likely, not for every experience, but certainly the orb phenomena, which has been prevalent all the way through human history. This could be a very high quality scenario explanation for what these actually are. So how does this all relate to my own UFO experiences? Well, this is where we have to leave the territory covered in this incredible research paper and begin our own information synthesis, because in order to discuss my UFO experiences, we have to first talk about and gain a better understanding of biophysics, the physics behind our biology. It may sound incredible, but our thoughts and our intentions are linked to electromagnetic activity in the body. The brain and nervous system function through electrical impulse, and when neurons fire in synchrony, they produce measurable electromagnetic waves. This is what an EEG reads. Some scientists would even argue that consciousness itself is an emergent electromagnetic field created by coordinated neural firing, but I would argue more towards a receiver model of brain-body-mind cohesion, that our bodies are highly complex biological antennas for receiving a fundamental creative force that we call consciousness. But what I want to stress here is that these ideas of auras and chakras and energy points, it's not just woo-woo hippie new age stuff, okay? It's been dismissed through that stereotype, but we know quite literally that our bodies are energetic. When you concentrate or meditate, the patterns of brainwave shift. Advanced meditators have been shown to produce very coherent high-frequency brainwaves, such as gamma oscillations, that indicate that many neurons are oscillating in unison. On an even deeper level, the controversial orchestrated objective reduction theory, or OR, by physicists Roger Penrose and anesthesiologist Stuart Hameroff, who I had an incredible interview on this subject with if you want to get deeper into the quantum consciousness model that these two brilliant people are looking at. But they posit that quantum level processes in the microtubules inside your neurons, these tiny little components inside our neurons, these might actually underline consciousness. Remarkably, emerging evidence shows that microtubule networks in neurons can support ultra-fast electrical oscillations, essentially resonating at frequencies from kilohertz to gigahertz and even terahertz scales. These are essentially electromagnetic vibrations at the subcellular level. During ordinary states, such signals might be incoherent and cancel out. But if one enters a focused, coherent mental state, say deep meditation or intense intentionality, these tiny vibrations could synchronize, amplifying like an orchestra playing in tune.
There has to be entanglement in the brain, and I think fundamentally the brain, consciousness at least, is a quantum system embedded in a classical system. The microtubules themselves, they're inside neurons. They're made of proteins called tubulin, these peanut-shaped proteins that self-assemble into microtubules, and there's about 1 billion tubulins per neuron, and depending on hundreds, let's say, of microtubules. We need something in biology to quite literally orchestrate these objective reduction events and turn the proto-conscious noise into Beethoven or Brahms or the Beatles or whatever. And that's what the microtubules do.
In principle, a human brain in a highly coherent state could act like a broadcast source of organized electromagnetic waves, a biological transmitter of intention. In addition to the brain, the human body has other electromagnetically active systems. The heart, for example, generates a strong rhythmic magnetic field that extends beyond the body. Practitioners of techniques like heart-brain coherence meditation can actually bring these fields into stronger alignment. Again, it sounds like hippie woo-woo stuff until you look at it from a strictly electrochemical biophysiological level. All of this suggests that when you hold a clear intention or enter a meditative state of focus, your body's electromagnetic field isn't static. It becomes more ordered and potentially stronger as a signal. Humans can emit detectable electromagnetic energy and even light when focused. At the Rhine Research Center, scientists used light-sensitive equipment to test people during intense mental concentration, such as healers projecting energy or meditators sending intentions. They found that some individuals could willfully produce bursts of infrared and ultraviolet light from their bodies well above baseline levels. In one series of tests, meditation groups spiked the ambient UV photon counts up to 100,000 times higher than normal when they projected intention, and the counts dropped back when they stopped focusing. So this isn't visible light, but it's real electromagnetic radiation measured by detectors. Likewise, other studies on biofield emissions have recorded ultra-weak photon release, what's called biophotons, from humans that correlate with mental intention. For example, healers concentrating on emitting chi from their hands showed significant increase in biophotonic output during the intention period. Overall, researchers have observed that biophoton emissions can be modulated by conscious intention and altered by mind-body states. In simple terms, when you focus your mind, whether through prayer, meditation, or the directed desire to communicate, your body seems to literally shine a little more, albeit invisibly to our own eyes, and its electromagnetic fields become more pronounced. We're only beginning to understand this bioenergetic aspect of consciousness, but it suggests a mechanism by which the mind can interface with the environment through physics. If we put the pieces together, a plausible scenario emerges to explain the experiences that I had with orange orbs that I feel responded to my thoughts. The plasma UAP study indicates that these living plasma, these UFOs, are attracted to electromagnetic radiation and hotspots of energy. When I went outside with a strong, coherent intention to make some form of contact, essentially broadcasting a mental invitation to beings of light. I may have unknowingly turned myself into an EM beacon of some form. In a meditative or trance-like state of focused consciousness, my brain's neural oscillations and perhaps even quantum-level vibrations in microtubules could have become unusually synchronized. This could translate into a surging, structured electromagnetic field around me, rich in oscillating frequencies and maybe even bursts of photons tied to my intention. And it's fascinating to note that in some esoteric traditions, enlightened or meditative individuals are depicted with a halo or a glow, perhaps an ancient artistic nod to this subtle light body that we can emit when we're in states of higher levels of consciousness. And by the way, I'm not trying to say I'm an enlightened being. I think that we have the capability of slipping into these states, but this isn't the typical human experience. 99% of my time, I would consider myself to be relatively unenlightened, and I have moments and flashes of intuition and experiences like this. So I think it's more about we're capable of falling into these more sublime, more natural, more fundamental states of consciousness, which ultimately we're actually trying to get back towards. But don't put yourself on a pedestal and say that you're able to do that 24/7. No one in the human world is capable of doing that 24/7, and I'm certainly not saying that. But I think that there is definitely, a level of correlation between the depictions of the light body and the actual electromagnetic processes that are happening in your body when you get into meditative and deeper or more expansive states of consciousness. And if a plasma-based intelligence in the vicinity feeds on electromagnetic energy, it could detect these kind of energetic changes. I have to think of my own focused mind as almost like turning on a small lighthouse, a subtle, non-random electromagnetic signal that's radiating into the night sky, into reality. Perhaps to some form of plasmic entity, this could stand out against the background noise of the vacuum. In the same way that the tether in the STS-75 drew in dozens of plasma orbs by emitting a strong electromagnetic field, perhaps a human in deep coherent meditation might draw the attention of a nearby plasmic phenomena, plasmic intelligence, and perhaps my thoughts broadcasted could be both metaphorically and physically real, a kind of biophysical invitation of some form. And these were the most visceral experiences I had with any form of phenomena. I had plenty of strange, fleeting light phenomena occurring in the starry night skies, but these 4 events, which I've spoken about on a number of YouTube videos, if you want to go through the channel and have a look at the testimonies that I've given on my own experiences, I had experiences with these orange orbs of light. And one of those experiences involved them coming down from the sky and hovering only a few feet above the roof of my house, 3-5 feet above the roof of my house. And, this was a life-changing series of experiences that catalyzed me into creating Project Unity and doing everything I'm doing now. So I find it very interesting that this paper, it just feels like there are some really interesting connections and correlations between this idea of plasmic intelligence, and perhaps we're actually interfacing with another form of intelligence that's around us quite consistently, but is only making itself known to us when we produce a high enough electromagnetic burst, a high enough field, and maybe they're not even that intelligent and they just come and swim up to you because you're a form of energetic food source or a form of energetic enticement, like a moth to a flame. It's hard to know if there's an extreme degree of intelligence or if it's just a relatively animalistic but plasmic creature that is just responding intuitively or instinctively to your electromagnetic output. It's a very interesting concept. And if these plasma forms are a kind of proto-conscious life, albeit not biological, but a form of life, it's conceivable that they might resonate with consciousness itself. In quantum biology, we can look at consciousness and quantum fields as intertwined. If orchestrated objective reduction, OR, is correct, conscious moments are essentially quantum states collapsing that are influenced by fundamental space-time geometry. So in a speculative vein, one could imagine a resonant coupling between a focused human mind and a plasma mind, perhaps via shared quantum frequencies or electromagnetic vibrations. While it's far from proven, this idea that mind can interact with matter via underlying fields is absolutely being explored at the frontiers of science. For instance, experiments in parapsychology have long reported that human intention can affect random number generators or even the behavior of cells at a distance, hinting that consciousness might have non-local influences, which I think it certainly does. If a plasma UAP, UFO phenomena has some form of awareness or sensitivity, it might literally sense an actively seeking consciousness and respond in kind. At the very least, the practical physics says it would notice a spike in local electromagnetic energy and perhaps it would be curious. So when I pushed out my intentions into the universe, which is absolutely how my orb experiences came into being, it started with me in my back garden getting into a basic meditative state and very clearly modeling my thoughts around the desire, the intention to have some form of contact, to have something reciprocate the same level of energy, the same thought process that I was putting out there. If something wanted to respond in kind, I was opening that doorway in my mind and in my body and in my spirit, you could say. And it worked because I had these orb experiences on multiple occasions when I was doing these practices. So I look at it less from a woo-woo spiritual perspective, but that has merit. I'm not mocking it, but the wider world has mocked that element of it for far too long. You have to recognize that it's kind of cringy. A lot of the ways in which people discuss these things, it's quite cheesy and, very spiritually leaning. If you just look at it from a biochemical and biophysics standpoint and look at the bleeding edge of science and look at quantum physics in our microtubules inside the neurons and how the science is changing, you begin to recognize that actually there is a level of credulity to this that isn't being given its due diligence just yet, but it will be, because the proof is coming. The proof is coming very quickly as we develop these models and as we begin to accelerate our understanding of the deeper layers of the kind of basement of reality in the quantum realm. Regardless, I just think that it's very interesting that these things are beginning to confirm the spiritual stuff. Even if you shrugged your shoulders and rolled your eyes at the kind of new age spiritual way of looking at things, there's a lot of evidence that's actually coming up in the biophysics departments. And so I think that this is a very interesting kind of correlatory symbiosis, this research paper on plasmic intelligence, because it opens up a door to understanding what you might be interacting with when you have these orb experiences. When you interact, are you in some way handshaking with a plasmic intelligence? Are you in some way giving it a way of interacting with you? And this is, again, something that the Buddhists in spiritual tradition would call a tulpa, a psychic manifestation. They would say to ignore these orbs, that these are just part of the meditative journey. The real journey is to get to true silence and true darkness. Everything that pops up on the way towards that journey, on the way towards that destination, should be ignored. Orbs and elves and UFOs and flying saucers, don't worry about all of that. It's distractions. They're baubles, Christmas baubles hanging up to be ignored. I don't know if I agree with that, but that's definitely one of the modes of thought for the Buddhists. But I think that this paper offers a very interesting thought experiment for what you might be actually seeing and interacting with when we have these phenomena come and visit us and experience us, because we're in these highly energetic states, and these seem to be drawn towards those kind of electromagnetic pulses and influxes in energy. So what do you think? Do you think that these orbs that people have been experiencing, myself included, perhaps yourself included, all the way through history, could they actually be a form of plasmic intelligence, not from another dimension or from another planet, but truly a part of the universal evolutionary dynamic on a plasma level? And if so, if plasma can be intelligent and these balls of light or these orbs of light are in some way a form of self-organized plasma, what does that say about the stars? If this is accurate, would that not suggest that the stars themselves could be some of the most conscious beings in the entire universe? Just some food for thought to consider if we're looking at plasma as an intelligence, because the sun, the stars, they are self-organized plasma. So very interesting. A link will be in the description box below for the research paper if you want to read it. I highly recommend you do. I think it's very interesting. links to the discussions with Mr. X that I had years back on plasmic intelligence and exotic vacuum objects and self-organizing plasma. That's all going to be included in the description box below. Please do support me if you can on things like Patreon or by becoming a YouTube member. You get early access to my videos, like my documentaries and my interviews and things like that. And you also get access to our Discord server, which is a fantastic place to hang out. So it really helps, and it helps me grow my platform. It helps me commit as much time as I can to doing this kind of stuff. In the meantime, I have a lot of things in the pipeline. A pretty big announcement that I'm not going to say anything about just yet, other than the fact that I've got a pretty big announcement. But that's coming very soon. I have something pretty awesome coming up. So looking forward to surprising you all with that. In the meantime, please do subscribe, like, share, comment, and thank you again. See you next time.